recorded live.
Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week we continue our retrospective in honor of the late, great Sir Christopher Lee with The Wicker Man. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, creator of the Alex and Housing novels. With me from Austin is Mr. Drew Edwards, writer for Rockabilly Online and creator and writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man. Say hello, Drew.
Howdy.
Howdy. And also in Austin, special guest Jamie Barr, musician, pinup model, educator, and the lead vocalist and upright bassist for Austin's premier all-female rock and roll band Danger Cakes. You can find out about their latest shows and their album Quarter Life Crisis at dangercakes.net. Welcome back, Jamie.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And from Los Angeles tonight, Adam Foshko, writer and creative consultant for Activision's Call of Duty Exo Zombies, the explosive new episodic Zombie Fest starring John Malkovich, Bill Paxton, John Bernthal, Rose McGowan, and Bruce Campbell, as well as screenwriter for the upcoming games Skylanders Superchargers, due out later this year. Hello, Adam.
Hello. Good to hear you again.
Oh, thank you. Good to hear you as well. Good to hear everybody. I'm very excited to talk about The Wicker Man. All right. According to Wikipedia, The Wicker Man is a 1973 British mystery erotic horror musical film directed by Rob. I added a few of those epithets because I couldn't figure out quite.
But I like it.
Directed a British mystery erotic horror musical film directed by Robin Hardy and written by Anthony Schaefer, two men who literally will not be in the same room together anymore. The film stars Edward Woodward, Christopher Lee, Diane Cilento, Ingrid Pitt, and Britt Eklund. Paul Giovanni composed the really sort of remarkable soundtrack. The story was inspired by David Finner's 1967 novel Ritual and centers on the visit of Police Sergeant Neil Howie to the isolated island of Summerisle. In search of a missing girl, Howie, a devout Christian, is appalled to find the inhabitants of the island, led by Lord Summerisle, Christopher Lee, have abandoned Christianity and practice a form of Celtic paganism. All right. Boy, what a strange film. So let's get our opening thoughts. Jamie, I think it'd be cool if you went first, and then Adam, and then Drew, and then I'll say whatever's left. So, opening thoughts, Wicker Man.
This is the first time I'd ever seen the movie, and I liked it. I thought it was pretty darn interesting and quite a different take on religion. And I really, really liked the fact that even though it was so out there, like musical numbers, and there's a few times where I was like, I'm not sure what's going on. But you kind of got just the feeling that this wasn't like other movies, and obviously it's still not, and you can feel that so many other movies have been, affected by this one, and I love the take on religion and the comparisons, and it definitely lends itself to a lot of interesting conversations.
Yeah, very good. Adam, tell me, surely this isn't the first time you've seen The Wicker Man, but what are your opening thoughts on The Wicker Man?
This actually isn't the first time that I've seen this picture. This is a favorite of horror conventions and sort of limited engagement sort of runs, and has been for years. I didn't see it when it first came out, but I saw it subsequently some years later at some horror convention somewhere. And it was really, I think this is and it was great to see it again, and watching it with sort of fresh eyes. I think this is a picture that's a product of a time of sort of the late 60s, early 70s. It's, as you can tell by the haircuts, but it's such a strange amalgam of things. It's at once gleeful and bleak. It's got this sort of isolationist horror angle going on. It's got nudity. It's got dense liturgical dance numbers. It's got some looking at the sideways looking at the camera, and this strange sort of feeling of a fear of small villages and towns, and also at the same time this sense of anti-Judeo-Christian, anti-government, anti-establishment, which I think was part of the time, and they're played off as very sort of modern and hip and the wise ones, while the cop is though a good man, kind of establishment and behind the times and a fool and uniformed at that. And it's just an interesting sort of I think depiction, maybe even of the social time, but as a sort of a conspiracy-laden small town, even reminiscent of things like Dagon and things like that later on, or even Lair of the White Worm. There is this sort of some interesting moments in it, and it's nicely done in a lot of ways. But it's definitely a snapshot of the time. I liked it as a picture, even revisiting it now.
Thank you very much, Drew. Opening thoughts, Wicker Man.
Well, it's been called the Citizen Kane of horror films, the first art house horror flick. But for me, this will always be the across-the-pond companion piece to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is the only real echo of American redneck horror that I can really think of that comes from that part of the world. And I truly adore this film. I think it's a seminal movie. Christopher Lee considered it his finest film, and it's easy to see why. It's very stylish. It's really, my wife really hit it on the nose. There's no other movie that is like it, even though there has been tons of movies that have been influenced by it. Some of them is off the beaten path, as Hot Fuzz. That was a huge debt of gratitude to the Wicker Man.
Really?
This is a classic horror film, even though strangely and dare I say pretentiously, as much as I love Vulcan Video, they put it in their mystery section. This is a horror film, people. Get with the program. Anyway, love this movie. I can't wait to see the conversation that it will spark, because there is a lot to discuss here.
All right. All I'll add to that as opening thoughts is that there are a lot of different versions of this movie. I mean, for instance, I watched a version that I think I rented from Amazon Prime, but there's an even longer version that I found on YouTube that has several segments that aren't in the version that I saw. So that Lord Summerisle, who Christopher Lee's character, who shows up really in the second half of the film that I saw the other day, when Edward Woodward finally goes to interview Lord Summerisle. In the earlier version the restored version that I've seen on YouTube, his character shows up several nights earlier and is standing in the dark and has a whole scene where he does some shtick by, involving characters, and then he turns to a snail and starts reciting Walt Whitman. I'm not making any of this up. There's, that whole scene is there, and it was removed. Likewise, there's some other stuff. There's some, extra scenes here and there. So it's kind of wild. All right. And multiple versions of this movie. And I also read a book about the making of The Wicker Man. So if I can remember anything cool to throw in there, I will definitely try. So okay, where to start? This film, I know that we want to talk about Christopher Lee, but I think first we should talk about the thrust of the movie begins with Sergeant Howie, played by Edward Woodward, has come from the mainland to the island of Summerisle, which is an island thoroughly and completely owned by the mysterious Lord Summerisle. And the reason why Howie is visiting here is because he's received a postcard that says, hey, we're missing a little girl. We haven't seen her in many months. Can you come to check this out? And this is like, when you say it's like redneck horror, Drew, I think I know what you're getting at. But what do you mean by that when you say redneck horror?
Well, especially in the original Texas Chainsaw, there's this element of fairy tale. You have gone off the beaten path, you've gone too far into the woods, and there are ogres and witches there, and they are going to devour you. The general idea behind what we call redneck horror, or hillbilly horror, or hicksploitation even, is that you're a city person, you're a domesticated city dweller, and you are dealing with a culture that is isolated, and you as a city dweller have no hope of understanding. And that is very much the idea behind this. You have this very, very, as Adam put it, establishment cop.
Yeah.
Dealing with some very...
Catholic, or I think he's Catholic, right?
He's Christian,
It could be C of E.
Yeah, but
yeah.
I would
That's
assume Church of England. He's a very establishment cop, dealing with some very strange and yes, isolated characters who have adopted this pagan religion very much the same way the Chainsaw family has adopted cannibalism.
And Edward Woodward, who plays this role, this is a guy that Americans might remember as being the Equalizer on TV. And what I love about his character as he goes through this movie is he never quite gives up his sense of just exasperation. That he's and this is an exasperating town because he's asking very simple questions like, hey, has anybody seen this little girl? Does anybody know whose mom this little girl is? And nobody will give him a straight answer. Everybody's sort of yanking his chain. There's a point where he's talking to the teacher, and he says, this is a point where he's pretty sure the girl has been killed. And he goes, well, are her bones in the churchyard? And the woman goes, well, it depends on if that's a churchyard, if there's no longer a church there. And you just see him want to literally reach out and strangle her for not being willing to just answer a simple question ever. And the whole town is like that. I loved it. I mean, there's a lot of comedy going on with Edward Woodward.
I love the fact that he could never say please or thank you. What's his deal? He's like a nasty cop. He's really rude. Maybe if he just said, would someone please come row out to me? Or, would you please send your dinghy? Maybe they would have been, granted, they were, he would have been the fool anyways for the day, but at least, they would have been nicer to him. He could have gotten a celebration out of it, but no. I don't know. I think there were a lot of things that he could have done to make himself more likable. I know we were talking earlier pre-call about the remake, but with Nicolas Cage not being as likable, but I didn't really think of our protagonist as being the most likable guy in the first place.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, in fact, I'd like to ask everybody, is he and we're free to do spoilers, okay? Are we supposed to be on Woodward's side? I ask this because my wife, who isn't on this week, she's busy with some projects, but she was like, I don't know, I kind of get the impression that you could totally read it that the people of the town are completely in the right, and Edward Woodward is
Yeah, I kind of felt like that too, where I was like, who's supposed to be right here? And then I thought, actually, that's the right thing, is that it's religion. There's no real right and wrong except for what morality transcends. Is it right to sacrifice someone? No. But is it right to inflict your ideals on someone else? No. So, I mean, there is that duality there, but
I think it's possible.
One better than the other,
I mean, it's possible that kind of that that's a cynical answer, but I think it's probably the cynicism of the film, and I think that's exactly what the film believes, is that both of the religions are equally false.
Yeah.
The problem is they murder Edward Woodward at the end, and I think some people have to get off the train at that point and go, well, I was with all these guys when they were all about free love and having sex in the woods and all that nonsense, but when at the point where they set Edward Woodward on fire, so, I think you're free to go, well, I wouldn't go that far.
Exactly. That's a bit much.
That's the other reason why I make the Texas Chainsaw Massacre comparison, is because we are saddled with a protagonist that is not particularly likable.
Yeah,
and I think that's a deliberate choice on the filmmaker's part.
I tend to agree. That's an interesting point, Drew. I mean, so and I'm knocked out by your observation that there's a direct sort of corollary between this and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Do you? Now I know there are. Let's see. I think in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it felt like, so you had an ensemble of protagonists kind of going in. Some being, I think, likable, I guess, and maybe certainly one of them being kind of whiny and not particularly likable. Does it come down to the question of are they deserving of the fate they somehow get? And though I suppose it's probably a bigger stretch to kind of go, well, to embrace paganism, is fine, and so is cannibalism in this case. It seems like that the cannibalism part would be like kind of a tougher sell. But, I think that the notion that this guy, even though he's there for the right reasons, lured there for the right reasons, he's there for the right reasons, but he goes about it in such an officious, demanding way, which is really more of the establishment. I think, again, this is part of the time, and then maybe even a deliberate choice by the filmmakers because, he needs to, even with such a bleak ending, he needs to sort of somehow, I think, deserve what he gets. It needs to be something where he's almost a sacrifice of the establishment in favor of, new free thinking, which is old free thinking, but it seems like he has to be a sacrifice, even in terms of just ideology, as well as the character.
It's funny, Adam, that he's so offended by stuff that strictly speaking isn't illegal. In other words, that the idea of like most of this stuff, setting aside the human sacrifice, which seems to be a new trick, the rest of it, they're doing maypoles, they're doing some white magic stuff. There's a lot of free sex, and they teach and they have sex ed. That stuff offends him, but I don't know if it has any legal in other words, I don't think
legal. It's not legal. It's moral that you're talking about. Legal just is the rules of the law, and that's what we say is right and wrong by the government standards, and that they're just rules that we all agree to.
Yeah.
That's but saying if something's right or wrong, there's the difference there. And is it right for children to be, talking about sexual education that early? That's up to the individual. It's
some people would say yes, and some people would say no, right?
Exactly.
And some communities might have a community standard. In fact, Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's normal throughout, here. I mean, that's kind of what's commonplace now at least in the States, it seems like, where, here we are in Austin, the little blue dot in the big red state, and we can talk and say whatever, crosses our mind when it comes to sexuality and, gender identity and every other thing that seems to be a taboo subject. But you go 20 miles outside of Austin and, things they're going to look at you a little sideways,
Yes.
So I feel like that was good thing that they were able to show in the movie. That, this like I said, I love this great like duality that was going on, and seeing both sides affected and how it, goes on, and wackiness ensues and whatnot. But
yes. Okay, so I do want to turn to Christopher Lee. So Christopher Lee and Drew said that this is Christopher Lee's favorite performance. And Christopher Lee plays Lord Summerisle, the man who, to all intents and purposes, holds this entire island. And he's the third Lord to own Summerisle, and he's he gives the background of how the island became this pagan sun cult, and so forth, and engages in this wonderful tete-a-tete with Edward Woodward when Woodward's investigation into the missing girl takes him eventually to the home of Lord Summerisle. But what I want to know is, what does Lord Summerisle actually believe? I mean, what do you guys think? Does Lord Summerisle believe that setting fire to a virgin will bring back the crops? Or what exactly is really his plan? Is that, or is Lord Summerisle a little bit trapped by what the people of the town now believe?
I think Lord Summerisle does believe it. I don't think his grandfather did. I think his grandfather started it for this whole thing for pragmatic reasons, which when they go into the background of the island, they talk about how there's certain volcanic soil which made it ideal for the first Lord Summerisle. The first Lord Summerisle, who was a great mid-Victorian botanist,
right?
To cultivate wonderful fruits and vegetables, but he had to get the people of the island behind it, so he gave them back their pagan gods. And I think it's safe to assume that the first Lord Summerisle did not really believe any of this stuff. He was just doing it because he knew he could give them a good workforce. Somewhere over the generations, there is the thing at the end where Howie is addressing Lord Summerisle. It's like, do you actually think that this is ludicrous? This isn't going to bring back your crops. And Lord Summerisle, with total conviction, says, "But I know it will," in that great Christopher Lee voice. And up until that point, you do kind of wonder, what Lord Summerisle believes. But at that moment, I'm convinced that yes, Lord Summerisle has adopted this religion fully.
Does everybody believe that? What do you think? Or Jamie, go ahead, Jamie.
I think he adopts it to. I'm gonna call him. It's kind of like, you ever hear the term CE Catholics or CE Christians?
No, what's that?
It's when you're a Christian or a Catholic and you go to church, and on certain days you keep. Sorry, hold on one second. There's a problem. I don't know. Sorry, I'm being motioned to. But basically, CE Catholics and CE Christians are people who only go to church on Christmas and Easter. And I think Christopher Lee's character, I think Lord Summerisle, is kind of on this notion. I think he benefits from the townspeople believing in the pagan rituals and whatnot. And so he talks about, his grandfather getting outed, basically by the townspeople, and he, rather than, stay on that same path, he chose to, I guess, go with the majority. And I don't think he actually believes it. I think he wants the townspeople to really believe it, but I don't know. I think he kind of sees it almost as like, oh, let them have their silly rituals, and this is anything that goes against what is happening will change it.
I think I tend to agree with that. I think he's like going, all right, the people will be assuaged by this ritual, and I in turn will have like a year to figure out what the hell is going on with the soil so that we can get everything working again. So maybe in a sense he's buying time. That's my read on it, but Drew gives also it's completely legitimate to read in this text that Lord Summerisle believes. But boy, he's quite sophisticated because he also he has an understanding of Christianity. He has an understanding of these being competing cults, and Christianity won all over the British Isle, but all over the United Kingdom, but he has lost Christianity's lost its foothold here on Summerisle for now, very interesting.
I think the thing is about the movie is they don't really offer you anything one way or the other with the what is right or wrong, and even though there's some light implications that some of the spell casting actually works, they never really show you anything overtly supernatural.
That's right. And again, I really do like the fact that he's he's got everybody on this island working in this cult, and I mean the word cult in the nicest sense. That they're all sort of taking part in rituals more or less constantly. They're all sort of engaged. It's he's got a perfect. Let's say for a moment, set aside your own personal feelings about religion. So I know some people totally hate religion, some people are totally dedicated to it, but set all that aside. He's got a really great religion going on his island. Again,
he even says that we're a deeply religious people.
Yes, and he's right, because everywhere that Edward Woodward goes, he encounters somebody who's doing something religious. It just so happens that it offends Edward Woodward's Christian principles because he happens to be if you step back from this movie, Edward Woodward is just of a competing cult, and he finds all of this to be really troubling. And that's a lot of fun. By the way, the scene where Edward Woodward comes across all the people having sex in the field, after his first night at the pub, there's a bit in the novel where Edward Woodward they go into what disgusts Edward Woodward about that, and it's not just that he's disgusted by the idea of sex, which was interesting. This idea that you can kind of see that he just is totally he's not into the body at all. But that's not it. As understood by the writer, when he's disgusted by the people having sex, it's because he had always thought of sexuality, being a virgin also. He thinks of sexuality as being something sublime, something almost spiritual, and this sort of animal sexuality going on just makes him think that humans are no better than animals, and that's what turns him off. And I just found that fascinating, this notion that that's the difference between these cults, is that the Chris Lee cult is all about kind of returning to nature and stuff like that, and sentimental magic and things like that. And Christianity is about some kind of sublimation, raising yourself above.
It's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, it was just something that came up in the novelization version. But Christopher Lee, he wears a crazy Austin Powers wig for the duration of the...
It is a wig, okay. I was wondering.
I actually called it Austin Powers hair as well. It's funny that you should say that.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, although it's blowing at the end. So at the end, I was thinking maybe it was his real hair because it was really blowing in the wind. But I don't know. I can't
That's
tell.
That's probably just some movie magic.
Yes. Yeah. No, it's entirely possible. And he sings, and oh my gosh, it looks like we lost Adam. So hopefully he'll come back. So he must He must have been blown off course. Hopefully,
he was abducted by pagans.
Hopefully, his seaplane will find its way back to our shores. I'll watch for it.
My big question about Lord Summer Isle, or more appropriately, the Summer Isle line, honestly, is where Christopher Lee's father fell in with all of this. You know, like because I can kind of, in my mind, I've kind of worked out the belief system of grandfather and grandson. Like I find the whole, like, I would love to read just like a novelization that followed, the great mid-Victorian botanist, and through the early 20th century with the sun, and maybe show Summer Isle during World War I or something, or World War II. I think that their cultivating of this pagan cult and their maybe shifting attitudes toward it could make for fascinating reading.
Absolutely, yeah. What a fun idea to imagine what the hell was going on with his dad during the Great War and World War II. Yeah, and how any of those outer world activities might have affected this strange world.
And Lee, the real Lee, was a World War II vet. So I mean, it would be interesting to think of this incarnation, like what was Lord Summer Isle doing as a young man that he'd go off and fight the Nazis. I don't know why I find that whole thing, the whole idea of that so fascinating.
What a great idea. Only for him to come back. You can imagine that. Like he's somewhere in France, liberating Paris, and meanwhile he's getting telegrams from home and going, well, after all of this is over, I have to go back and become the Lord of Summer Isle. What a great idea. I love that nutty concept. There were various sequel ideas for The Wicker Man, and none of them were as good as that, honestly. I thought it was really interesting that they give him a kind of a hippie outfit. His is the most modern outfit on the island. Everybody else is wearing clothes that would have been, perfectly, at home, a century before almost. But he's wearing these khaki pants and yellow turtleneck, and he's very much a modern man.
Well, even when they give him the kilt and tartan, he looks like he stepped off the set of the Avengers, and by that I mean the BBC John Steed and Appeal Avengers. He's got this very mod look. Again, it's funny that we all kind of went to the Austin Powers, but he does have this very kind of mod hip.
It is a mod look
vibe to him.
It totally is. Welcome back, Adam. I see this.
Thanks.
Yes. Yeah. Good. I'm technical difficulties. I'm glad you made it back. We're talking about Christopher Lee's really mod wardrobe, and it's so funny that we know he's known, and he hated to be known as Dracula, which was such a Victorian character as presented by Hammer, and it's a Victorian book, but anyway, all those period pieces, and he's literally the most modernly costumed guy on this.
Well, this was Lee trying to step away from that. That was one of the ways they got him involved. It's like, okay, well, this is a horror film, and we're going to use you to sell this as a horror film, and your fame as the great Hammer star. But this is going to be such a different character for you, and even the way he's portrayed. We think of Dracula, and we saw a little bit of that last week, where is this very somber. Yeah. With these deep, tones. Lord Summer Isle is very jolly.
Yeah, he really is.
He's not your typical Lee character.
He's positively gleeful.
Yeah.
He laughs. He's smiling off. You're totally right. He sings silly songs. I mean, the song he's singing with the librarian is this sort of like Renaissance Festival style body song, with like silly puns and nonsense, which is funny because he sings in that profound voice that he has.
and yet, gleeful and Maude and sort of wonderfully costumed as he is. I mean, he is a lord and he lives in this amazing house, and everyone else lives in sort of the village sort of housing. What's interesting is I saw the version of him, with the snails and Whitman, and he delivers the boy, to the innkeeper's daughter and all that stuff. And what's interesting is you still get this sense of him, particularly in that scene, more so than at the end, or maybe during the reveal of all the events that sort of have led the sergeant to his fate. You still get the impression of him really being the puppet master of this island, of this situation, of this at least the practical fulfillment and continuation of this religion, of this practice. He definitely, particularly when he's just speaking in the night, to the snails. It's I feel like it's probably done for our benefit, but you also, in the context of everything else, you just get the impression that he is walking around at night, delivering, young men to girls, and making these, introductions based on this ancient practice, and they're all dressed in kilts, and and then there's a song that follows.
Did you have this scene? Was this scene in the one that you saw where Christopher Lee brings the 14-year-old boy to Willow as a sexual sacrifice? Does this sound familiar?
They talked about it on the documentary that Jamie and I watched, but it's not in the version, and I don't think I've ever seen that. I don't think I've ever seen that extended.
Yeah, I mean it's I mean, to be honest with you, it's not a very long scene at all. The scene with the boy, that's mostly done through sound effects. You hear passionate gasping and stuff like that while Edward Woodward is being tortured by sex sounds and stuff. And there's also a lot of folk music going on, and Christopher Lee stands in the garden and recites "Leaves of Grass" to a snail. It's just delightful. It's the craziest thing. I mean, it's really one of those points where you just realize that this movie is thoroughly bonkers, and it's kind of a delight that it got made. I want to talk about Britt Eklund. So this is the woman who plays Willow, the landlord's daughter, who has her own song sung about her. In fact, so we've got a woman who is very interesting looking. She actually didn't want to be naked in the film, so although we do see her topless, when there are the full body scenes, that's a body double because Britt was pregnant and she felt self-conscious. She was gaining weight. She was having a hard time with. She didn't like the idea that she was going to be naked and writhing around in front of a door, and so that's a go-go dancer that they hired from somewhere nearby when we see the full body. It's also not her voice. Britt Eklund had, I think, it was a Swedish accent, right? And so she couldn't do a Scottish accent, really. She insisted she did just fine. Regardless, we don't know. The producers decided to replace her voice with a dubbed-in voice. So she doesn't like this movie. She says, she reports getting along very well with all the people working on it. Although she said that, she reports getting along with Edward Woodward, but she's annoyed that it's not her body, it's not her voice, so she kind of feels like the creation of her in the film is not really her. So I just thought that was interesting about Eklund.
I thought it was interesting. When we were watching the little documentary footage that it came with the on the DVD, that when they went through the cast of actors, it was apparently very cold when they were shooting, because even though it looked like spring in Scotland, it was actually like October and November. And so there were times where, especially like I guess at the Wicker Man scene at the end, when they're all kind of hand in hand, all the extras are standing out there, and they'd be out there for hours, and people would be freezing, and they would run up to, and try to give the actors their coat, and Britt Eklund would like steal it from them, and the other woman, I can't remember her name,
Ingrid Pitt.
Yeah,
Ingrid Pitt.
She just said thank you, and then I believe it was the librarian, the other female.
Ingrid Pitt was the one that was like, I'll wait till all the extras get there.
Yeah, she was. The other one just took it and she said thank you politely, and then she was the one who, had the backs of the extras.
That's really, really sweet. Ingrid Pitt's an interesting lady. I mean, so Ingrid Pitt's here, and the producers were not. Ingrid Pitt's here because she had a family connection. Maybe it was a married connection to a number of film distributors in the United States. That contributed to her both getting cast and her being willing to do it. The producers were very worried that casting Ingrid Pitt would give this movie too much of a Hammer thing, that they were like, we're going to have Christopher Lee and Ingrid Pitt. Both of those guys are going to make people think this is a Hammer movie, although couldn't have hurt, honestly, to be associated with that. But whatever.
I was really excited to see Ingrid Pitt. It's, for me it was like, I don't know, Countess Dracula, I suppose, was sort of where
Vampire Lovers?
Yeah.
She's wonderful.
I felt like this was, sort of like Lee. It was sort of a departure from things that I'd seen her in before, and I thought that was great. While still sort of maintaining a horror flavor, a horror flair. It was just in a different wrapper.
She's playing. It's kind of funny. She plays a nymphomaniac librarian, and although, well, that's what she tells us in the interviews. Honestly, the librarian doesn't necessarily come across as nymphomaniac, except that when Edward Woodward is searching the town for the missing girl, because he still hasn't figured out that every single line of dialogue in this movie has been for his benefit, that the whole island has been putting on an interactive play just for Edward Woodward. Anyway, he's searching for the missing girl, and he comes across Ingrid Pitt in a bath, and she just sort of like starts to cover herself and then just sort of chews on her lip and stares at him, and like it's Confessions of a Window Washer or something, and he just sort of backs away and continues his thorough search.
I have a question about this. Since we're both talking about the librarian and Willow, kind of back to back. They wanted the cop because he's a virgin, at least in part.
Yeah.
So what would have happened to their great virgin sacrifice if his resolve hadn't been quite as great as they'd estimated, and he had got it on with one of these
great question.
Not unattractive women, and frankly, it appears at one point that Willow is trying to cast some kind of weird folk music sex spell on.
Okay, let's spend a moment on that weird folk sex spell. Yes, she has a whole song. She uses her room as a drum. She's like, she's singing the song, and she's also going bap, bap, bap as she hits different portions of the room in rhythm with the song. And and it's this siren song where he's on the other side of the wall, and it's literally driving him crazy. I'm impressed that he doesn't go into the next room. And so I don't know. Does anybody want to take a guess? Because I think it's between two ways.
Is it a trial on the sort of the suitability of the sacrifice? Is it the sort of thing where
possible?
I mean, I guess he says it. It's interesting. He says it at the end. It sounds he's a virgin. He becomes in his own free will. He is a fool for a day.
The virgin thing, though.
Yeah, but the thing about it is, is he a fool? I mean, because he's a fool. It's like, was he a fool to turn down those two women? It's one of those things that, it's, I don't know. I don't quite know what would have happened.
Why does he say he's a virgin? I want to know that, because he says
he says he's a virgin.
He says he's promised to a woman back home, and he doesn't believe in going outside of his courtship. He doesn't say before marriage. He says he doesn't believe in outside. He says the outside partnership. He never says he's a virgin. It's never stated.
He does actually say, he actually does say he's waiting till marriage.
I seem to remember that.
I thought he said he was waiting for her, but maybe I'm misremembering. But I even thought then, I was like, wait a minute, he's a virgin?
Yeah, he's a virgin.
I just thought he was saying that he's only with one. He's only. But I'm not saying that he's not a virgin, but I'm just saying.
You're saying you didn't get it out of the text. I get you.
Yeah.
But
I think they just assume that, and maybe what counts as a virgin in the 70s,
Yeah.
Well, maybe they had to identify, because they wouldn't have known that he was a virgin. I mean, I'm sure they researched this guy, but maybe it was during that time that they were still sort of. It wasn't May yet. It wasn't May Day yet. So I wonder if these were sort of they knew that he came with his own free will. They knew something about him, I guess, certainly, but about the time that he said. And I thought that he said that he was, he didn't believe in doing that before marriage as well.
That's what I
got the impression that was the checkbox that was like, okay, virgin. And otherwise, maybe they would have let him go. I have no idea. But
if he had gotten it on with Willow or Ingrid Pitt, do you think they would have just let him go on his merry little uptight couple?
No. The reason I think the answer to that is no is because I believe the whole thing is part of the sacrifice. So I think if he has sex at this point. It's already part of the sacrifice, so I think nothing that happens once he's set foot on this island counts. That's my read on it, but that's a sort of convenient read because you're right, it is a big risk that he was going to sleep with Ingrid Pitt or Britt Eklund. Who knows? It's a good question. It's
the scenes are there, I think, to the scenes appear like they're there to continue to underscore the fact that he is. Deeply religious, deeply, establishment, Church of England or whatever he is, and I think it's partly for our benefit. And it's funny. I didn't think about it when I was watching the picture. What happens if he does this? So you guys bring up a really interesting point, but I saw them definitely as continuing opportunities to underscore the fact that he as an individual, as a man. Was so not like everyone else on this island.
Yeah.
Apart from him being offended by everything, it was really like, no. Even when he's tempted, even when there's a musical spell being cast, with from the room next door, still nothing. It's he uses all of his willpower and whatever else to sort of not do that. And it just was like, okay, he is clearly other.
Yeah, he's absolutely, and that's what makes him a very, very appropriate sacrifice. Is that he's so, he's the perfect scapegoat in the traditional sense of the word. That all of our anxieties are going to be cast onto this guy. By the way, there's this moment when he's in the graveyard and he's just appalled that there are no crosses anywhere, and so he picks up a piece of wood. Couple pieces of wood, and he builds a little cross, and he lays it on one of the graves.
I don't think he's appalled that there's no crosses anywhere. I think he's appalled that they were storing apples, putting stuff on the grave.
Yeah,
I don't know if that was the same thing.
Okay, fair enough. That's true. But he's appalled at the condition of this graveyard. He feels that it's not properly consecrated, and he wants to do his tiny little part to the extent that he can, and he picks up a couple pieces of wood and he fashions a cross and he just lays it there, which is so sort of profound in his one man's faith, right? Anyway, Woodward said that he went back in the 1990s, and he actually came across this cross. He said that he literally found the cross laying in amongst just sort of rotting wood. He said it was so strange that it had been unmolested for over 20 years, which I just think is remarkable. He spoke very highly of this, by the way. Edward Woodward seemed apparently really enjoy, which is funny. Woodward loved it. Christopher Lee loved it. Christopher Lee went out of his way to sell the hell out of this movie. I mean, he was selling it for years. There's this point in the book about the making of the film where Christopher Lee sent clippings back to England about reviews of the film, because the film made the rounds and was being reviewed as late as like 1978, which is crazy that a movie, any independent film, could be getting like newspaper reviews and stuff like that for 5 years, after its initial release.
Well, it's funny, when I first came across this movie, probably in the early 90s, as a VHS tape, and the video store in my hometown, I had no idea what to make of it, because it just had it was like a kind of like I kind of wonder now if it was a bootleg, but it was kind of a hastily Xeroxed outline of the shape of the actual Wicker Man, and it was like, what is it? What is it? What is it? Big question mark. The Wicker Man, starring Christopher Lee. So when I first rented it, I assumed it was some kind of monster movie where the Wicker Man was going to end up being this monster. Because, Christopher Lee, I knew from the Hammer movies that I'd seen, that meant kind of like a certain thing. And then I got this, and the first time I watched it, I was initially kind of confused by this movie, and then it wasn't until, luckily I was a very daring kid, and I would give everything multiple chances, and on subsequent viewings, I started to kind of pick up that this was just a really great, out there, weird movie. But I was initially disappointed that there wasn't sort of some kind of giant rampaging wood golem in this film.
Can you imagine what this would first of all, imagine what this would be like if you're like a teenager in Central Texas in the 1980s or 90s, which I think happened to all of us, where you get this movie and you're like, what? There's like wacky hippie nudity, and it's sort of slow moving, and nobody dies, and it is. And you mentioned the Avengers. A lot of times it looks like an episode of the New Avengers, except for that it's on an island. So yeah, I can. God, we lived that world of like Xerox VHS copies.
True.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I wish I kind of completely understood how the VHS world worked at the time, because there were an awful lot of super cheap VHS, but there was an awful lot of, I think, just pure good old-fashioned bootlegging going on with a lot of the independents and the independent bookstores. The other thing that basically, when we get to the end of this film, we realize that essentially, like I said, this has been a lot like the movie The Game, in that everybody on the island has, in a way, been acting a part for Edward Woodward, just to slowly maneuver him to the very end. And if I understand correctly, that includes everything he does, including overhearing, the stage whispers of the landlord who's going to knock him out, so that he in turn will knock out the landlord and steal the punch costume and enter the parade, and then make it all the way to the end.
He thinks the girl that he's looking for is going to be sacrificed. That's the deduction that Detective Howie has made at this point.
Yes, and that's apparently the deduction that they've put in his head, basically. They've led him down that path by showing him all these clues, hairs and everything, so that he thinks that the person in a hair costume is going to be it. And I got to say, by the way, there's that point in the ritual towards the end when they've got the swords and they're like lowering it around everybody's head. Ingrid Pitt looks genuinely worried that they're going to cut her head off. Because everybody has to go through, and it's a game of chance and so forth. I thought it was quite suspenseful, and then the hair actually does go through, and Howie for a moment is worried that that's going to be the end of the girl he's been looking for. So what do we think of the Wicker Man itself?
Oh, the actual
design of the.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's huge. I'm amazed at this thing. Did it bother you that the movie's called The Wicker Man, and therefore, in theory, it's giving away the end of the film?
No.
No.
I knew there was something about it, and I knew, like, I kept saying, I was like, does tell me, like, I know somebody dies at the end. I know somebody's, like, burned to death, and that was, like, the only thing I knew going into the movie. Yeah. I was like, someone's burned to death, right? And just, yeah. I was like, okay, well, I'm glad I knew, because I wanted to be a little bit, I had a rough week, and I need to be emotionally prepared sometimes for certain types of horror movies, but yeah, no, I thought it was a pretty cool design. I was scared for the animals.
Yeah.
I mean, I know apparently there were a lot of people boycotting the movie when it first came out because they said they were, going to burn the animals, and the director wrote an email, or not an email. Yeah, he wrote an email in 1970 something. No, he sent a letter to the press saying that, they weren't going to harm, like, set all the animals on fire. There's just the cute and cuddly ones.
Right, the pandas. He said, we're just going to burn pandas. Just
yeah.
I
thought that was pretty awesome, actually.
Tweaking thing to say.
Another crazy thing to think about the Wicker Man that we see in this movie, they actually built 3 of them.
Mm.
So
there
was 3 of those, and that's really amazing to think about.
There's the giant one that he actually is able to climb up into and get put into. There's another one that I think may have just been head and shoulders for
that last scene for when the sun sets.
That's right. Yes, that's right. You guys saw a documentary. I haven't seen this documentary. It sounds great, by the way. I don't know what you'd need a third one for, but who knows? It's just so interesting to think this is a real.
Hey, why not?
Well, I was just thinking this is a real movie. In other words, there's a hell of a lot of people doing stuff and building things and making things look as simple and sort of handmade as the film looks.
Yeah.
It's actually, there's a lot of artisans doing work.
It was really low budget too. Christopher Lee said he didn't actually get paid to do the movie.
Wow.
Yeah. So I don't know if that meant like ever or just like before, if he didn't get like a front and got maybe residuals after the fact. But he said nope, never got paid. So
hard to imagine. I mean, it's possible.
But he said he did that because he believed so much in the movie. So and this was a movie that
really
couldn't have been made if he had charged like his usual fee. So.
Well,
but I wanted to know, why didn't Howie fight harder at the end? Like, Drew kept saying, well, there were a lot of them, and, his hands were tied. And I just have to say, if that cop was a woman, she'd be kicking and screaming, and I didn't care how many people were there. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, he just kind of just was like, all right, put me in a robe.
Kind of accepts his fate, but not really. It becomes an argument. Of ideology.
Like, I think he keeps thinking they're really not going to do it, maybe, and like, all right, but I don't know.
That's possible. I think at the point that the wrestler is carrying him up the stairs, though, would be a good point to try and kick and scream.
Yeah.
Well, he certainly hoots and howls once he's in there.
But he's just yelling, and even that, it's Wicker. Come on. How many of us have sat in a wicker chair and broke it? Like, I mean, come on.
The Celtic
like,
Druids
start kicking a little bit.
The Celtic Druids did actually sacrifice people in Wicker Men, so this is based off of a real thing.
I know, but still, it's not like this. I mean, yes, this thing might have been built well, but you think he would have tried, I mean.
I agree. The only way you could explain it would be if he, in any other movie, you would think that what they would have said was that they had given him some heavy drug, that made him sedated or something.
No.
I don't know. I have no explanation.
I mean,
in fairness, he resisted sex with a lot more resolve than he resisted the sacrifice. So I guess I have to concede to Jamie's point.
Adam,
I mean, can you kind of get through this with the notion that being English and being establishment, he has righteous indignation, which you see from time to time, particularly, you know, with the different things that are happening on the island. But is he just so, how do you say it? Is it almost a statement about, you know, somebody who's been so demanding this entire time, using his uniform and the basically the emblem of his office to throw his weight around, that when they stripped of that, he's only left with this sort of, you know, this sense of disbelief that this would actually happen, and he's sort of easily overpowered because he's helpless in the face of it. I just keep getting this sort of impression that, you know, it was just all disbelief, that he no longer had his uniform, he no longer had, you know, anything else. He was, you know, are they trying to make a statement about this man now and how he?
If he had been an American copper, he would have had a gun.
Yeah, an American.
Right. Yeah.
But I see your idea, Adam. You're saying that that's in other words, we're not supposed to read this quite so literally. That to some extent, this is a symbol of something, of how, you know, maybe it's when you take away the rules of society's men lose their power. I don't know.
Well, he loses his power and becomes, you know, as a you know, as a police officer and, you know, as a higher up of society. But, you know, at the end when they're talking about, you know, all you have now left is your faith, and, you know, we're still gonna kill you, but hey, now you're a martyr. You'll be considered a saint, you know.
And well, there might be something to that. The idea that he's not going to fight, instead could be that he's so appalled. Yeah, this is sort of along the lines of what Adam was saying. You know, he's so appalled by this fallen world that he's going to just be a sacrifice against it.
Well, he does curse them.
Yes, he does.
And he curses their crops to fail, and says next year it will be no less than only the Lord of Summer Isle himself will do. So he does curse them. You know, he has that,
like a witch in one of the various, you know, Witches Burn at the Stake movies that the Italians made. You know. Yeah.
Well, the other thing about this, though, and I will say this, even if he had had a gun, even if he had put up more of a fight, he is literally helpless because there are so many of them.
And technically, he still wouldn't have been a saint because of that, just because he was, you know, killed because of his beliefs. And because technically, if he wants to be considered a Christian saint, he would have had to not curse them. He would have had to actually forgiven them. So he actually stoops to what he thinks is so beneath him by cursing them.
Wow.
Well,
that's a profoundly dark thing to point out. Not bad.
Leave it to me for that one.
No, it's good though. It's good. You know, I have no argument against that. It sounds good. We should probably wrap up. I want to get people's final thoughts and then get to our endorsements. I'm sure that we could probably talk for another hour about The Wicker Man, but we should spare our audience an episode that runs longer than the running time of the movie itself. Okay, so we went in this order. I think it was Jamie, Adam, Drew, and then I'll go. So, final thoughts, Jamie. And I'm curious if the listeners listening and they're like, "Oh, Jamie, please tell me, do I want to watch this movie?" You know, last week with Count Dracula, we were kind of like, you know, you can probably just watch the monologues. Is it this way too? You know, you can just watch some of the nudity sections. Or...
I really liked this movie. I thought it was quite an interesting watch. It was freaking weird. I'm not going to say it wasn't, but you know, I definitely thought it gave a lot of food for thought. And yeah, there's a lot of nudity, and that was kind of interesting. And but it was funny because even though there was technically it seemed like there was a lot of sex all of the sexual nudity for the most part was actually like blurred out. So I thought that was actually kind of interesting. But I did like I like a lot of the thoughts that it brought up and points, and I don't know, I just think it's definitely worth a watch. I would say if you've got some time and you're looking for something that's not your run-of-the-mill horror movie. Although I kind of seem to think this is more of a psychological thriller. I know Drew is insistent that everyone's like, oh, it's a horror movie. But I'm like, he's the only one who dies. I mean, I guess there's that weird hand. What do you mean it's not a real genre? Like, it's not a category on Netflix. It's a category on Netflix.
Netflix is wrong, too.
Okay.
A thriller is a horror film, okay? Like, that is a bogus genre that Hollywood
really?
has
I mean,
come
do you really
up with.
feel that way? That, like, The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, you're saying that that's a horror film? I mean,
yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
That's a slasher movie.
Okay.
When Hollywood makes a seedy horror film, they call it a thriller.
Wow.
And it is a con.
I don't disagree with you. I just my mind is blown.
Job.
Okay, but you know what? Jamie was the one doing the reporting. Okay.
I love
it. Wait, we'll get there. Jamie, go ahead.
Well, that's how I feel about that. It's worth a watch. I'll let Mr. Drew take over if that's
Oh wait, it's Adam next and then Drew.
Actually, Adam
go ahead,
next.
Adam.
I agree with Jamie. This is definitely a picture worth watching. Drew said it was seminal. I agree with that. I've also seen it described as Citizen Kane of horror pictures. I don't know if I agree with that. There's some very strange shots. So they could have benefited from a little bit of a little Toland. It's just sort of, in terms of cinematography, to sort of, make that play a little bit. They're very odd choices. There are elements in this that remind me of John Borman, particularly when he did Zardoz and things like that. There are a lot of really strange elements to it. But the picture really holds together really well, and it's so gleefully put together and tongue-in-cheek in spots and just so strange, but not in a way which is off-putting, but just in a very kind of, it's not surreal like Dali or something, or watching, El Topo, but it's surreal in a sort of a lyrical way, while still projecting against a very, very stark horror angle, and a fear angle of isolationism and and conspiracy, and an incredibly bleak ending, despite all the songs and naked dancing. So I think it says a lot on a bunch of different levels, and I still think it is also a snapshot as a product of a time. So, but what's amazing about it is I think it definitely still holds up. And it's, as Drew pointed out earlier, it held up really from across the pond. I think it's something that resonated well here in the U.S. As well as in the U.K. So though I don't know exactly how it did initially in the U.K. Certainly it survived these many years, and the Wicker Man, despite the fact that it's such a giveaway for the end, is a very iconic image, and one that you can still just flash somewhere on the screen, and apart from the remake fairly recently, you tend to think of this picture. So to have that kind of lasting impression, for it to actually be something that translates through generations, is kind of unusual. So maybe it's the Jaws of horror pictures. I don't know. It may not be the Citizen Kane, but I think it's got, it definitely has legs, as they would say. But it's great to sit through. It's really great to kind of see it again. Yeah, see it.
Very cool. Drew, final thoughts, Wicker Man, and you could even dovetail in more of your theory on how there's no such thing as a thriller.
Well, there is no such thing as a thriller. Okay, that's what that is. Well, I mean, there is, but thrillers are horror films. And
Okay.
and maybe this is something when I get around to, I should actually write a prolonged essay or something for my Canadian website whenever it gets launched. Because I can certainly distill all my thoughts into that instead of derailing the last part of the show as much as I already have. Call it whatever genre you want, but The Wicker Man is an amazing movie. It is one of the most important films I think that Christopher Lee ever did, and he certainly touched our beloved genre in many, many different ways, but I think that this is a particularly good one. It's among my favorite Christopher Lee movies, and I just think it's so different from any other film, yet so influential, and if you haven't seen it, please, you should watch it.
Very, very good. I have nothing to add other than that I really like horror movies that have a very interesting setting. Actually, I just like movies that give you a wonderful setting, like a travelogue. This one looks gorgeous. I love the way the little harbor looks. I love the town. I love everything about, you know, the various places in Scotland where this movie was filmed. It's a beautiful. I even like the way that the pub looks when he goes. You know, the one pub where everybody hangs out in the house he's in. You know, when you think like American Werewolf in London presented those guys walking into a Scottish pub, and it's this sumptuous red wood place where everything just looks like it's been.
That's actually a Welsh pub, Jason.
Oh, okay. Well, very good. This looks plastered and cheap and sort of shoddy, but also quite old. And in other words, it looks very real, and I love that. I love the realness of this place. So that's it. You should definitely see it. It's a cult movie. You know, right up there with the best of them. And I'll give some more thought to the question of whether there are thrillers. Let's talk about our endorsements. What are you watching? What are you listening to? What do you want people to pick up or pay attention to or read? Jamie, what's going down?
Don't start with me.
I don't have to if you don't want me to.
Okay, yeah, don't start with me. I actually have to really think about this because
I'm
freaking my tail off.
Fine. It's totally fair not to have your endorsements until you are called upon, because it doesn't exist until the professor actually asks you for the answer. Adam, do you have anything to endorse for us this week?
I do. Mr. Holmes, which I saw just this last weekend with Ian McCullen playing Sherlock Holmes at a couple of different ages, you know, one in his 90s and one, you know, earlier. And I really liked it. It was a very interesting take on Holmes. It was he was terrific. He really made the whole picture. He was great. There were a lot of good people in it, but he was particularly remarkable. And you know, it's the near polar opposite, you know, to certainly to Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes. But you know, if you could, I've heard it described probably wrongly, but interestingly, as you know, as the opposite bookend to young Sherlock Holmes. So you've got young Sherlock Holmes, you've got whatever you think Sherlock Holmes is, sort of in the middle, and then you have this.
Yeah.
And it's really wonderful. There's something really nice about it. But it was unexpected and, you know, interesting characters. He plays Holmes very well, and not the way you're always used to seeing Holmes. So I completely recommend it.
Very cool. Wow, very good. Actually, Drew, before you go, I would like to do one really quickly because it involves something you were involved in this past week.
Okay.
My endorsement this week, one of them anyway, is there's a new interview with Drew Edwards on the Rid of the Bomb podcast. And it's a really cool interview. You talk a lot about the process of writing, about different things that you're interested in, about your dedication to the art. It goes deep it's a very good conversation about a professional and how a professional does his work, and with a good bunch of guys. So I really enjoyed listening to that interview, and I think people should look for it. I think we've linked to it on the page. So that's the interview with Drew Edwards on Rid of the Bomb. And also, I this week was testing Shudder.com, like Shake, Shudder, Shudder. Shudder.com is a new iPad app and also website and Roku app that is completely dedicated to horror movies. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm not interested in, and so I can't remember what the monthly price is, but, you can trial it and it's just unlimited horror films and a lot of really obscure stuff, a lot of great stuff. And I'm mainly interested in, silent films and obscure Italian pictures and things like that. And they've gone out of their way to break the horror movies up into genres that horror people would be fans of. So I recommend that you at least go check out Shudder.com and see if it would appeal to you. Let's see if I can bring up some of their genres real quick. I'm going to, haunted habitations. They actually divide stuff up into like collections. Asian horror, psychos and madmen, eco terror, psycho spoofs. If you want horror comedy, Identity Crisis. There's Magic, the one where Anthony Hopkins has a killer. Dummy. So this is like very, very cool stuff. Foundations of Horror, which is all like is all silent films like Caligari, Phantom of the Opera, and so forth. Neat stuff. So
where does Mario Bava fit into that?
Mario Bava, actually, I could swear there's a Bava picture somewhere in one of the supernatural horror things, because they have a lot of the Dario Argento stuff. Like they have opera, but I'm trying to remember if they have like Black Sunday. So I don't remember. They may very well. I just can't remember. So it's cool. You should check out Shudder.com. It's all about horror movies, and I'm all for it. Especially because to me, horror lately, when you go to a website that's all about it, they're always focused on stuff made in the last 20 years, which just has very little interest for me unless for some reason everybody's just begged me to watch something. So this, you can kind of quickly go into different areas that are of more interest to you. So that's it. The Drew Edwards interview on Rid of the Bomb and Shudder.com. Drew, do you have anything to endorse for us?
Oh, well, first off, thank you, Jason. That was
Of course.
I don't react well to positive feedback. I almost never know what to do with it, but there's been a lot of positive feedback to that interview, and I just feel a little choked up about it, to be honest. And one of my endorsements is certainly that you should go check out the Rid of the Bomb podcast and listen to their other episodes, not just the one that I'm on, but is the their whole Your Nerd is Showing network, because they have other podcasts. They have podcasts about Bob's Burgers, about Gilmore Girls. There's some other stuff about video games and comics on there. So I'm sure a lot of the people listening to this podcast probably enjoy the Your Nerd is Showing network. My big endorsement of the week is Lost Soul, which is about the attempt by Richard Stanley to do his version of Island of Dr. Moreau, but it evolved into being the John Frankenheimer Island of Dr. Moreau. And it's just a fascinating story, and Richard Stanley himself is a very interesting character. And I've seen Hardware, and I just now saw Dust Devil. I never actually had seen it before, but he's his films are interesting, but he himself is an interesting character. He's very into the occult, and his was raised by his mom, who was a practicing witch, as well as also being an anthropologist. so he grew up to be this very oddball kind of guy, and the history of this film and the way it devolves into the movie that we eventually got is just fascinating. And it's fascinating for me as a fan of the Moreau novel. It should be fascinating to anybody who's a fan of Richard Stanley, and I think it'd be fascinating to anybody that just is interested in seeing how movies get made and the process that goes behind that. But it's easily available on Netflix. It's a great documentary, and I can't recommend it highly enough. I know Tony recommended it when it was out in theaters, and I guess I'm kind of seconding that. I just was very taken with it. It kind of makes me want to go back and rewatch the Frankenheimer Dr. Moreau, but I think I'll probably regret that, despite its incredibly awesome, for all the flaws that movie has, it does have some very amazing makeup effects in it. And anybody who listens to this podcast knows I'm a sucker for a well done monster.
All right, I can go with that. That's a weird ass movie. There's a million things that you could watch before you need to get around to watching that again. But
you should watch the documentary about the making of before you actually watch it. And again, that's called Lost Soul, and it's on Netflix right now.
It's very good. Adam and I were talking about that very recently. Yeah, excellent. Jamie, do you have anything you want to endorse for us this time?
I do. I was racking my brain because I've worked so much this week. I had Girls Rock Camp, so we had our week-long session with our showcase on Saturday at the North Door. We also had Danger Cakes' album release party at the White Horse. Which
was packed, everybody.
Yeah,
packed.
It was pretty awesome. There was a line around the block. We were filled to capacity, so that was pretty exciting, and definitely a wonderful way to go into this. And our new video is about to go up next week, so hopefully you'll all be seeing that soon. But to stop talking about myself, I actually was trying to think of, my gosh, I don't know if I've actually sat down and watched anything new in the last week. There's a few nights I've fallen asleep to episodes of Futurama, which I'm sure doesn't really need that much of a.
But no, that's good. If you're like, listen, I've been rediscovering Futurama. It's awesome. I think we will all take that. Good.
But that's not it. That's not my real,
endorsement.
My endorsement. Because, like I said, I've been all about Girls Rock Camp and rockin' women. I don't know if you've seen Pussy Riot, A Punk Prayer, but it's a documentary about Pussy Riot and their court struggles. And I found it to be brilliant and incredibly interesting and just amazing to watch. So, like I said, if you're in need of some good documentaries, that one's also great. And the What Happened, Miss Simone is also on Netflix now. Yeah. I got to watch, and I'm a big Nina Simone fan, and didn't really know about a lot of her mental illness in her later years and some of the things that they talk about. It was really sad. So, but I felt like I had such a bipolar week this week that, and sometimes a good sad movie is what you need. And on that note, my other recommendation is actually not a my endorsement is going to be a non-traditional one. I don't know if we've ever had an endorsement of a funeral company before, but I met at my CD release party the funeral director for Distinctive Life Cremations and Funerals, and I just have to say they were the warmest, sweetest people I've ever met, that were in this type of business. And I know that's not something that people would tend to endorse on the show, but we are in the horror genre, and sure, why not? But yeah, I thought that would be an interesting endorsement.
That's great.
So, it's something that nobody really wants to really think about ever, but if you have to, I would say check distinctivelife.com out and maybe drop Melissa a line. We're dealing with one of our bandmates. Their father is losing his battle to cancer, and it was nice to have somebody who just made everyone feel so much better about the whole process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much. In other news, Adam, I have your answer. On Shudder.com, yes, there's a bunch of Mario Bava movies, including Black Sunday and Black Sabbath and other movies that start with the word black. So you're in good shape. You can check that out. All right. They do not have Black Emmanuel, which to me would make any library complete. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you, everybody. I'm so glad you guys were here. For those of you who are listening, we are going to continue our Christopher Lee retrospective next week. Come to the Facebook page, leave comments, leave critiques, argue with us. We will definitely engage. Absolutely. Leave reviews on iTunes. It means a lot to us, and we're so excited to come to every week and listen to what you have to say. So thanks, everyone. I'm so glad that you were with us, and have a fantastic week.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks, you too. Good night.
Good night.